which is COVID-19. Now, what we're going to talk about, because we're all grown-ups here, we've seen people in ISIS around the world being taught to go around and use spitting onto door handles, deliberately trying to increase the infection rate of COVID-19 and spread the COVID-19 virus. So realistically, we need to take a grip that although this is happening with COVID-19, transportation is being delayed. We've also known that airports, the aviation industry has been shut down in countries, but still we've had so much activity in Southeast Asia. Abu Sayyaf have been busy. We've had the incidents in Mindanao, the Philippines. We've had kidnappings. We've had all these types of things all happening in the background. So it's important that we don't always get distracted what's right in front of our faces. Professionals make things look easy. Amateurs make things look difficult. And I'm pleased to be we're here with this professional group again, because that's what we have to be. We are the protectors. We are the guardians. And as I always try and intimate to people, that we don't choose our profession chooses us. Because of the, especially with SEB, if the lights go out, it would be disastrous for everybody. So let's start with the Taliban 2.0. So the first Taliban was very interesting. So International Security Assistance Force was sent to Afghanistan to bring peace and prosperity and force a change of leadership in Afghanistan. But what I find quite interesting is that it took 20 years to keep the Taliban at bay. And it took them 20 minutes to come back and take the country. Now we have to put that into perspective. 20 years of fighting, 20 minutes to take over the country, logistically. Now, there's a very, very interesting saying that they have in Afghanistan, and it's a very old saying. They say in the West, the people of Western mindsets, we have the clocks, but they control the time. And that's a very telling statement. Now, when we look at the security implications of the globe now since the recent attack on the airport in Kabul, so what we've seen is a transfer of power from military power, Western power, back into the hands of the Taliban. But what we saw was there was no real security in that airport. And that's very telling and very inspiring to terrorist organizations. It has an immediate impact because it shows a weak Western force. It shows weak Western security. It shows weak Western ideology to actually be a strong deterrent. And it creates more encouragement to organizations thinking they're taking on world superpowers. So Kabul military airport had no real security in place. The United States apparently did a deal with the Taliban to say, okay, we're going to leave. You must protect their perimeters and have a collapsing perimeter so we can extract and we can leave. But somehow or another, that was all disturbed because a member of an organization, which we didn't mention on the list, but we're going to talk about now, the Taliban had control. And there was a suicide bombing attack which killed a number of armed forces people from the United States and injured and wounded many people and killed a lot of people as well. Now, how did that actually happen? And this is important for understanding the nature of security and how Afghanistan impacts the wider region. So the Taliban, as we know, basically we have to understand the origins of the old Taliban come back from the Soviet war in Afghanistan, the Cold War, when we had thousands and thousands of women left Afghanistan and their husbands stayed in the Mujahideen to fight against the Russian armed forces. Those men stayed with their sons and the children stayed, and the children became refugees. Now, what happened to those refugees between the time of the Soviet war and now, the first Taliban? They were taken as refugees to madrasas in Pakistan, and they were trained, educated in a very virulent rudimentary form of Islam. That's what we call the madrasas. And then they were sent back over the border into Afghanistan, funded by, people believe, the ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence, the intelligence service in Afghanistan, and fed back into Afghanistan to destabilize the country. But what we do know is that when we see how the Taliban was before, the way they treated women, the way they treated their people, and the situation of security was quite bad, so the International Security Force had to come in. Now, when we seen the actions of the Taliban back then, they were very, very violent, very rudimentary, carrying out executions of anybody they saw fit. There was no rule of law. So apparently they were defeated by ISAF. They left. Suddenly, Taliban 2.0, a new squeaky clean Taliban has turned up. The Taliban turns up. Here we are, we can speak, we have microphones, we can talk to journalists. They've been warned, they've been schooled very, very well. They've still got their tribal clothing, they've still got their weapons, because the weapon is what rules the day and controls the people. They have media savvy skills. They have, most important, better military training, and we can see this when we see the pictures filtering out. We can see action pictures, we can see news pictures, and we can actually see the Taliban holding the weapons, and they're actually holding what we call a professional finger, which is outside the trigger guard, and they're more safety conscious when they're handling weapons. And they seem to have a lot more control of their weapons. And to be quite honest, when you're expecting the bloodbath of the Taliban to come into the airport, we didn't quite see that happen, although we've seen a lot of violence, and it is expected to happen. Saying they're going to treat women much, much better, they're going to be a lot better as rulers. But here's the problem. As they were taking control and taking sovereignty of Afghanistan, we saw a suicide attack. And it wasn't, they say, by the Taliban, it was by a group called ISK. Now, who is ISK? Islamic State Khorasan. Now, what is Islamic State Khorasan? Well, the Islamic State Khorasan is basically an organization which was founded in and around the conflict in Afghanistan. We have people coming in from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and these are disgruntled fighters that came from the Taliban itself, who believed that the Taliban were not vicious or violent enough to be able to actually take control. They didn't want this, so they decided to form what we call a splinter group. And the splinter group of the caliphate, which caliphate was this? The caliphate in Syria and Iraq. So IS that we've seen in Islamic State in Afghanistan and Iraq, they formed a splinter, which is a new group off there called ISIS Khorasan. Now, what is Khorasan? Khorasan is basically an area of Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And this was a region from the 8th to the 13th century, and it was ruled by a man called the Abbasids. The Abbasids was a tribal group, and it was run by Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, the Abbasids. Now, this is interesting. This was the third caliphate after the Prophet Muhammad. Now, what they're doing is they're actually trailing back on a conversation to justify violence today. Why? Because terrorists cannot justify, they have no legitimacy for violence, so they use perceived acts of violence and historical attitudes and situations to bring into the present day. So what does this mean? If this is the area of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran, now we're going to have more trouble in that region because it's going to cross the Sunni Shia divide within Islam. And then we're going to see that they want to create a new caliphate. Why is this? Because the Taliban and IS are at war with each other, Taliban 2.0. IS is in direct competition with Taliban 2.0, the newly, new savvy, media savvy organization. But here's the challenge. As the Taliban 2.0 were taking control of Afghanistan, we had an attack on that sovereignty. So now what's happening is we have a vacuum forming, a vacuum from power. So the Taliban 2.0 had control. Now they have an enemy, which is ISK, trying to seize control from the Taliban because the ISK do not believe, who are former members of the Taliban, are violent enough to actually be in control and make a full Sharia state in Afghanistan. So what does this actually mean for us? We've seen with Osama bin Laden and his formulation of Al-Qaeda, which sought refuge in Afghanistan from the Taliban. And when we look what Osama bin Laden tried to do with Al-Qaeda, he tried to unite the Ummah, the Islamic world, together under a common cause. And it wasn't successful. Now, since the death of Osama bin Laden, and if we go back and look at Al-Qaeda, we see that Ayman al-Zawahiri the doctor of Osama bin Laden, he actually stated in his documents and his statements when he was actually dealing with ISIS at the time, he said, unless we, as Al Qaeda, form one country to create as a heartland, as an Islamic state under the full Sharia, they will have lost. They will have not succeeded in achieving their objectives. Now, when you see Syria and Iraq and what's happened in that part of the world with IS, the world believed that IS was defeated. It was never defeated, because you cannot defeat an organization like that in conventional warfare. Because when the caliphate of IS in Iraq and Syria collapsed, all the technology, all the skills, all the ability had already been sent out into the world. And we've seen this take part in drone development, weapons development. We've seen it all over the world. So what does this actually mean for the new Taliban 2.0? It's very interesting, because we see a brand new, shiny, super organized Taliban under direction from the world saying you will behave as an international actor. They formed a new state, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. They're saying they will treat people with respect. Children can go to school. There won't be mass executions. But now we have an insurrection starting from ISK. An insurrection means people who wish to upset the status quo of a society. So now we have a vacuum forming between the Taliban seizing power, a direct challenge to them, which is ISK, and different groups fighting amongst each other. And this is very sad for the people of Afghanistan, but it's also very sad for us as security personnel around the world. Why? Because as the Taliban seized power, and as ISK moves into power to challenge them, all the weapons that were left by America and other states that were seized, weapons, highly advanced weapons, technologies, air power, all types of wonderful technology, the best military technology in the world is now all in the hands of Taliban 2.0 and also in the hands of ISK. So what does that mean for us? Well, we now know that Afghanistan is going to be a breeding ground for terrorism once again. We see that the Taliban's trying to give reassurance to the world, but they can't, because now they have a splinter group operating in amongst them in direct competition for control with the Taliban. We now know that in this region, there's destabilization, because the Taliban are tribal people. They're smart with the media. They're getting sharper. They're getting better. But how long before the weapons and the technology starts getting proliferated out of Afghanistan into different countries and shipped out to different countries? So how long is it going to take before that weapons can't be controlled? Why? Because they couldn't stop the control of weapons, technology, proliferation of people during the 20 years of conflict in Afghanistan, because Afghanistan's been a conflict a lot longer than 20 years. It's been a history of conflict for the longest it's been around for. Now, interestingly enough, if we look at that impact, how are they going to stop the proliferation of weapons, the proliferation of technology, the creation of improvised explosive devices, the aviation capabilities they have, which were all seized because security was not put in place for a proper military withdrawal. Now, as we weren't there in Afghanistan at the time, there's not much we can contribute to what should have, could have, or would have happened. But when we have a spectacle of a massive suicide bombing against a world superpower like the United States and all international forces, that's going to give super, super powerful empowerment to different terror organizations in Southeast Asia. Now, at the moment in Indonesia, the security forces, counter-terrorism and anti-terrorist forces are actually rounding up a lot of people that they believe will be inspired by this attack in the airport, because they form a relationship, because OIS has a relationship with Jaman Anshuratullah, and basically they're an affiliate of a highlighted affiliate of OIS. Now, they're active already in Indonesia. That's a very big, impactful area in Southeast Asia. Al-Qaeda has always had a very close links with Jamaat Islamiyah, which we saw was creating the Bali bombings. So when we see influence, when we see affluence, when we see brazen abilities to attack world forces like that, how long will it be before those weapons are proliferated out into Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, all these countries, and how long before we see those weapons turning up to different shores?
No, sorry, I've got a question.
Sorry.
So who are they supporting? I mean, who are they backing? Is it ISK or ISIS? It can't be the Taliban.
Yes.
It's ISIS, right? Or a form of ISIS.
ISIS-K Khorasan, which was a region of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran in the 8th to the 13th century by the Abbasid dynasty. So what happens is they claim responsibility. They want another caliphate because they believe modern states are basically colonial structures, and they believe it's a sin against Islam. So they want to run the whole thing as a caliphate. So what happens is now the Taliban are in direct conflict now with ISK. They've been enemies for a long period of time, mainly because ISK are former members of the Taliban who came across one because they believe the Taliban are not vicious and murderous enough and rudimentary enough to be a representative. So they're the challenge now. So the whole area and region is being destabilized. And as we see, there's already trouble in India already with